Right, here we are again, Nick. I always enjoy these discussions because there's a pleasant sort of difference between us, but there's also enough commonality, I think, to have a sensible discussion. And I think that's one of the things that concerns me in this environment where
Mm.
sometimes you're actually talking to ideology rather than a person. So it's really good to be speaking to a person and a person who has got such an interesting, background and useful view, and frankly also you care, Nick, which I think really matters. So I think what we're going to talk about today was the Labour ideology, and
Mm.
specifically, relating to Black Lives Matter, that lovely, misleading celebration, um,
Yeah.
in my analysis, and also
Black History Month.
Black History Month. That's the one, yeah.
Yeah.
Which is probably a relic of the Black Lives Matter thing, isn't it?
They're connected.
Yeah, so I think it's really important to understand this sort of culture. Even since we last spoke, my thoughts have moved on. I'm moving very fast. I'm actually working directly to try and resolve this problem on a number of different fronts. So even since the last week, there's a whole raft of things that have occurred to me. So over to you, sir. Tell us what your views of the Labour culture and how the BLM thing, and we'll come on at the end to talk about what the solutions might be.
Yeah, so we know, and it's been going on for decades now, we know many of our political parties. So the Tories, the Lib Dems, the Greens, and Labour have all been ideologically captured. And they have been, I would say, all of them have been captured post Thatcher.
Yeah,
David Cameron, he destroyed the Tory party. It was him that introduced all this hugger hoodie, the green agenda. We're all quick to blame Labour because they deserve to take a lot of the blame.
yeah,
But we keep forgetting that it was 14 years of Tory who introduced all this nonsense. It was the Tories. Hence why I don't care who wins a Tory election at the moment, because whoever wins is tainted because they
yeah,
were in power. It's the people who come after this leader that will be the important people who won't be, hopefully won't be tainted.
yeah,
So again, where did it all start? This was a long march through the institutions. Sending more and more people to university helps all this along. We sent more. I mean, I've not been to university, but we started sending people who shouldn't have gone to university. They came out with poor degrees, poor grades on poor subjects, and suddenly they all thought they were intelligent.
yeah.
And they weren't. They just have a degree, a piece of paper.
Mm,
Um, that then fed into a lot of the ideology they learned at universities, and suddenly, because they hold a little bit of information of someone who sounds famous and intelligent, and I read their book and I know one or two quotes, therefore I must be intelligent like them. I must be a philosopher. I must be a groundbreaking world leader because I've been to university. I've got a 2-2 in lesbian dance theory. I can quote a little bit of Marx and I know a little bit of whoever. I'm a somebody now, and it's
yeah,
it goes back to that saying about a little bit of knowledge is a very dangerous thing because these people don't understand anything. And the
yeah,
fact that university started specializing more in topics instead of giving people a wider range of knowledge and information. So you understand now a tiny, tiny part of a very complicated topic, but you don't understand anything else.
yeah,
And that's how we've used indoctrination and ideology now to run our country. And because we elect our politicians now over many decades have become less and less intelligent, because the more intelligent you are now, the less likely you want to go into politics,
yeah,
because on the grand scheme of things, it's not paid that much, even though it's a fantastic wage. But
yeah,
in the private sector, if you're the top 1% of intelligence in the population, you'll be paid a lot more somewhere else.
yeah,
You look at the abuse you get, you look at the interference in your private life, being dragged through the press. So we don't have the best going into politics anymore now. We have the second tier who
yeah,
look at it and go, 92 grand a year is amazing for me. I want that, and I'll do as I'm told because I just want the 92 grand a year.
Yeah.
So we don't have the leaders, we don't have the visionaries, we don't have conviction politicians. We have career politicians who swapped public service for self-service.
Yeah.
That's who we've got now running the country. Um, and then you look at some of the ideologies they've jumped onto. If you remember 2020, Black
Mm.
Lives Matter hit our national consciousness, but they've been going something like 10 years in America. Every time some young black man was shot dead, they would pop up and scream racism.
Yeah.
Suddenly it came here, and it's like, we don't have the same culture here. We don't have the same police forces here. We don't have people being shot to death here in the same numbers. We have knife crime here. Again, knife crime is almost black on black violence, where in America it's gun crime, black on black violence. People jumped on board. It was the biggest virtue signaling we'd had for many years. And Black Lives Matter now was all falling apart. We now know it was a crooked organization,
Yeah.
stealing tens of millions, spending it on mansions, giving family members millions of pound contracts for something they had no experience in. Then you look at the smaller chapters in America. Some of them have been arrested for paedophilia, for fraud, for prostitution, for gun crime, for gang crime. Look in
Yeah.
this country, we had the woman who raised money for Black Lives Matter in Bristol. She was charged and found guilty of fraud. It happens everywhere. This was just one mighty scam that we
Mm.
all fell for because it was a perfect storm of a video filmed of a man dying at a great angle to make it look like the narrative. We were in
Yeah.
lockdown because of COVID,
Yeah.
and we went slightly mental as a nation.
Yeah. And I think it's yeah. I mean, one of the things I've realised in the last week is um, that the left is a very powerful set of tools. Marxism is a very structured, very good way of attacking people, Nick. It's very organised. And one of the things I realised is that if you take an electorate or a set of MPs, because people can't cope with it, and someone sticks their neck out at the top, take it Farage or whatever,
Mm.
um, you've got an electorate. Well, the left are sort of the left. You've then got the right who are sort of they can't cope with it. So, and the left are better at fighting this battle. So what happens is that left lot either goes silent or actually go along with it, and particularly women. And without just from a purely biological perspective, women without children, in particular, they find this sort of nurturing, let's look after
Mm.
people type mentality, which is natural and healthy in many ways. But it makes them more prone to this. So you find this, if you take the electorate, there's then this sort of 75% of the electorate, which has been driven by Marxism. And the more the person at the top speaks out, the more that increases. And because people don't know how to cope, and there's a lot of gaslighting go on, people start questioning their own sanity on the right. And you've got this real true battle between truth and the lies of Marxism. Um, I think now, as you rightly say, there's also this element of superiority without any sort of justification, and it's utterly unaccountable. You and I have talked about the unaccountability of this. So, and actually, the thing that's occurred to me as well since I last spoke is that the way to, in fact, I remember I mean, most of my career I've spent in factories which are distinct. And actually, weirdly enough, I'm very left wing. I've always been the supporter of the underdog on the shop floor. Um, Oddly enough, even though most people probably think I'm quite right wing, and I remember I came across this sort of entrenched behaviour, very sort of anti. The 1980s shop floor automotive were pretty awful places, really.
Mm.
And I used to have to deliver change, and what I used to do with the trade unions, and I used to really baffle them. I used to actually get involved as a manager in a suit, rolling rolls of cable around the shop floor, which really baffled them, as that broke down all the demarcation at the time. Uh, and then the second thing was I got them involved and made them accountable, and that really they couldn't cope with that at all
Mm.
because they were quite happy fighting, but they couldn't cope with accountability. But when you did that, then I could pretty much you get them on board and make them accountable. All this bullshit goes away.
Mm.
And I think the other thing about a factory is that, frankly, if you screw it up, if the quality of the product is wrong, then things go wrong very quickly, and someone jump on you. So
Mm,
the accountability is sort of embedded in the system. And I think in the public sector, you don't have that sort of cause and effect. You can introduce this, let's say, woke mind virus, for want of a better word, lots of ways of describing it, but it is a contagion. It is
mm,
contagious. And it will spread and it will destroy. And because you haven't got that direct sort of manufacturing customer relationship, I screw something up and you can't then fix it because you can't make something wrong right. Then you've got this awful sort of mess. And ultimately, it does lead to violence. I mean, you mentioned knife crime, because people, when their virtuosity gets uh, challenged or third party victimhood, this I'm really concerned about some of the, particularly the Islamic type influences in Parliament at the moment, where they're absolutely adamant about the Israel come Jewish situation, and it's not a
mm,
rational discussion; it's absolute conflict, and actually that is very destructive. So very few number of these people can actually make quite a destructive influence and immobilize others. So I think, yeah, and I think particularly, speaking from a Christian perspective, that I talk about the spiritual side of this, and the Christian perspective on this is if you give the devil an inch, it takes a mile, and you get the
mm.
diabolical elements, and that does escalate into violence and complete destruction, which is, put it another way, as Trump says, it turns everything to shit, which is very much, I think, tragically what we're witnessing at with the Labour Party, and I think specifically Starmer. It's classic narcissism. It's important to recognize the sort of psychological traits. So if you challenge him, he will immediately come back with a lie. And this is like the far right label.
Mm,
Um, and the thing about the scapegoat, because you've got this victim scapegoat, and scapegoat actually is the analogy of scapegoat is actually to dump all the sin, all the
mm.
junk on the scapegoat, and then you kill the goat, right? That's the old sort of meaning of scapegoat, and that so pretty dramatic. So this whole pylon thing online and stuff is really very destructive, and to fend off a label racism, which is not a well-defined term in the first place, is very nasty. It's a very nasty, vicious label because it's not like saying. I remember, when you go to school, someone might call you smelly. In fact, I can remember someone calling me smelly when I was at school, which is something that's just personal to me. It's actually, I don't know, do I care? But actually, if you're calling something racist, it's actually about your values and the way your whole way of being. It's a much more difficult thing to fend off.
It is bad, but I think that word now has lost all meaning and lost almost all its power now. The word racist now has been overused by so many people for so many decades that lots of people now, when they see the word racist or hear someone's racist, they take it with a pinch of salt because they know so many people who've been labeled racist who are not racist. So it's lost all meaning.
Well, I think it depends which. I think between you and I, it has, Nick. But I
Mm,
think when it comes to the police force, so specifically today, the Met Police chairman has just, I think he resigned or got fired or something. I haven't read the story in depth. I've been busy doing other things this morning, but he got shafted and had to resign because of actually talking about racism in the police.
mm,
Um, and so, to a certain subset, it is their attack tool. So I think we don't operate. So I talked about this subset of 75%. It matters to that. Well, it doesn't matter to the whole 75%, 25% of them sort of sitting in the gaslit sort of mess. But it really matters. That's the attack tool of the Marxists, the left. So it matters to that lot. The rest of
mm.
rational people don't think it, is it, well, we can see through it, but actually defending against it. And I think the problem is that you're right to dismiss it, but it also needs to be addressed and sort of as a tool needs to be understood what type of statement that is and actually put it in a box. Um, and I was at the Reform Party conference the other day, and there was a reporter that was walking around, basically really taunting people like us. Uh, and I actually had, and they were basically starting because all there was these left wing people outside accusing him of
Mm.
Farage being racist and all this stuff, and all the Reform Party are racist. And so this reporter was coming around from Times Radio, and her starting point was, well, what do you think about the accusation of racist, which is a very difficult question to handle. And I what the guy, one of the Reform guys, just before me that spoke, I noticed, just deflected it. You can't afford to deflect it. You need to shoot it down. And I did a response on Times Radio. In fact, weird enough, I was the only person who was quoted on Times Radio. So someone
Mm.
might like to look that up if they want to see what I said. But there's a way of responding. But I think this, Black Lives Matters is really destructive. The Marxists are very good at language, and they're very clever. If you read the Marx, the one thing Marx was very good is very good at corrupting language, and Black Lives Matters are very destruct. It's a negative generalization. So if you deviate one way or the other from it, you get attacked. Very clever.
It's hard to disagree with it
Yeah,
because Black lives do matter. So how can you disagree with Black Lives Matter?
yeah.
It,
That's the problem with it. Yeah,
you might disagree with the Black Lives Matter organization,
yeah,
but you don't disagree with the sentiment of the statement. It's very clever.
yeah.
Let me put this to you. Do you know why Marxism won't die?
I think I've got my view of that. My view of that is that this is Marxism, and it's an attractive trait to a lot of people. So I think there's sort of two modus operandi. One is for people like you and I, we face the reality of life as best we can, take accountability, and you know, get on with it. The alternative modus operandi is one of blame. It's one of division. It's one of this sort of victimhood, which started off with just purely a financial thing,
Mm.
and now it's turned into, and so that is very attractive for a lot of people. It's a great way of copping out. So psychologically, my view is it's a very easy way to cop out of life. It's a whole world which is created, but it does turn everything to crap because it's based upon lies. So that'd be my view of
Yeah,
that
I
question. What were you thinking of?
I would dig even deeper than that. Everything you said there is correct, but a majority of the population who see Marxism as favourable, they may not be Marxists, they may not want to go down that route, but they look at it and they go, that seems fair. I know, I see what they're getting at. The reason that won't die, and the reason why people keep trying Marxist ideology over and over again, and we've got 100 million bodies to say it doesn't work. It's
Yeah,
not worked in any country on any continent with any race of people
no,
with, who had been dominated by any type of religion. It
yeah,
just
yeah,
doesn't work. The reason why
yeah,
it won't die is because socialism, Marxism, is based in our DNA. It's there. And the
yeah,
reason why it's there is because we used to live in small tribes.
yeah. You're right.
And
Yeah,
in a small tribe, Marxism, socialism is the way we ran that tribe. We
yeah,
would share our resources. We would share security. We would, if
yeah,
you didn't get anything at the kill, you'd have some of our kill because I
yeah,
know you would pay that back next month when I don't get a kill. Everybody was related, cousins, third cousins, would intermarry within the cousin relationship.
yeah. You're right.
We were close knit,
Yeah,
50, between 50 and 100 people in tribes. It works on the micro scale. So therefore, we look at Marxism, we go, yes, that's fair, that's how we should live. Unfortunately, what works at the micro level doesn't always work at the macro level. So when you extend it to a
yeah,
nation, it doesn't work. And the reason why it doesn't work is because when you're the more and more you're removed from the center of power, the less your face is known, the less they care about you as an individual because they
yeah,
don't know Pete anymore. They don't know Janet anymore. That's
yeah.
just someone I've heard of who's one of 10,000 people.
You're right. Yeah,
When you know the decision makers, when you know the tribal leader, and they know your face, and they've held your babies, and they've gone to war with your husband, it's a whole different matter there altogether.
yeah,
This is why socialism and Marxism won't die.
yeah,
It's inbred in us, and because
yeah,
of that, the power hungry use Marxism and socialism to gain power because they know at a very base level we're attracted to it.
yeah. I think there's very no. I think I 100% agree with that. That's a very. I've probably mentioned a similar sort of thing in the past. I mean, it's interesting actually that even the Farage um, mantra, which is currently family, community, and then nation, it's very similar to. So it acknowledges the elements of socialism. I think absolutely we are 100% reliant on each other. So I think what you've just described is uh, absolutely right, and it's also the entrepreneurial thing because if you look at innovation, it's always bottom up. Look at democracy, it's always bottom up.
Mm.
And if the minute it's top down, you can't come up with solutions that are there's no way you can come up with one solution to fix your and my problems, Nick. They might look exactly the same on the face of it, but and I think the other thing as well is that people are uniquely made in the image of God, frankly, and there's very little difference between you and I and others. We are utterly unique. So to assume that you and I, what goes on in our heads, we're beautifully different, if you know what I mean. And it's a question of valuing that. And of course, what you've just described completely trashes the notion of the sanctity of the individual,
Yeah.
which is just, I mean, it's just, yeah, and I, yeah, so
So we're all different, as you
yeah,
say. We're more similar than different
yeah,
because we're the same species, we're from the same nation, and we have some of the shared values. So,
yeah,
so human, me and you are more similar to someone on the other side of the world than we are different from them. But those differences matter.
yeah,
And how we get the best out of individuals is by allowing their individuality to flourish up
yeah,
to a certain extent. So it's a fine line between putting yourself first and putting your family first and putting your community first and putting your country first.
yeah,
There's a fine line between all of that. It's down to all of us and our societies, families, and nations to work out how we tread that line, because we want us to be individuals,
yeah,
because there'll be things you can think of and design that I'll never be able to think of and design. So I want people to be able to improve the world and improve their lives and everyone around them and around them, their lives, by
yeah,
being an individual. But on the flip side to that, we need to make sure that you being an individual then doesn't harm your family, your society, your nation, because you become too individualistic.
yeah,
And that's the balance we have to traverse all the time, that thin line. And where that line is, I don't know. And it probably shifts from decade to decade and person to person. But for me, that's the question in life, is how do we walk that line? Because I don't
yeah,
want the state to take over and look after the state. And I don't want individuals just to care about themselves,
yeah.
because
I
that ruins society as well.
Yeah, and I think, yeah, I 100% agree. So I think the other thing I'd add to that is that in order for society and culture to work, there has to be a norm. I mean, old Norman Tebbit used to say that people who come to this country, if they come from Pakistan and they're playing England, who do they support? Cricket, that's a critical question,
Yes, it is.
and without that norm, you can't have a without a norm in culture, you can't have a society or a state. It just doesn't function.
Well,
I think,
let me jump in that. I would change that a little bit. It's not, I don't think it's so much a norm and a culture. Below that is, if you don't have trust, if you don't see those people as the same as you, why
yeah,
would you want to share your resources with them?
I know, but I think the trust gives you it's like, well, I think if you take you and I, Nick, there's the reason why we've got a degree of trust and between ourselves and frankly, value each other's opinions because there's enough commonality in our cultural well-being and norm for totally different reasons, which sort of makes us, let's say, British, whatever that was, which we talked about before, um, which is the basis of trust. So I think, I mean, what I would say, what I was just let me, I'll just make this
Sorry, yeah.
point. It's okay. And I think the other thing you talked about is in terms of truth's the critical thing. Actually, in order to reach the truth, it means that you and I need to challenge each other's thinking because we all have different perspectives, and we should challenge and we should steer each other. So we don't have a divine view of truth, or actually, this is the postmodern thing that everybody
Mm.
does. What you think is yours and that cannot be challenged type rubbish. When in fact, reality, in order to steer a business in the right direction, you need a team of people, you need them to have a strong relationship. So this is where Christianity actually comes in. Because do you know why Jesus died on the cross, Nick?
It was for our sins.
Yeah, but do you know why? Do you know why that was important to him?
No.
It's because it's all about relationship. Okay,
Right.
it's all about. So if you've got some sort of normality in culture, and you've got good relationships, you've got people working together, then you're going to get a good outcome, right? So and Jesus died on the cross to have a relationship with us, and also for us to have a relationship with other people. And so the first commandment is to love God and love other people. So that's that's the sort of vertical reference, which is not narcissistic, because it's not about us. And then you've got that ability. So the theory is therefore that when you go into battle, you're looking out for each other in
Mm,
your community with a common culture, so you can fight the battle. Which
mm,
is, I think, to a large degree, the reason why the Brits, against the odds, won the Second World War, because they had extraordinary purpose derived from pretty much that. They all had Bibles, rightly or wrongly, um, and so um, yeah. So I think yeah. The other thing I think with this is that we are creatures of habit as well. So I think even good people, if they start doing the wrong things, can get bent out of shape. I mean, one of the more stark ones, which is less politically correct, was there was a psychological experiment done in a prison in the States where they dressed all the men up in women's clothes, and after a short period of time, the men started behaving like women. Um,
mm.
and so people are manipulatable, and once you stop, because you have to align your actions with your beliefs. So if you put a woman's dress on, you have to therefore act that out, if you see what I mean.
Yeah,
And I think it's exactly the same. If you're in an organization, Nick, and you've got Black Lives Matter type stuff going on, you're being forced to believe lies, frankly. And what that does, which really concerns me, and I notice this psychology, is that it normalizes lies and also shuts people up, because it means that once you do that once, Nick, if you're in a board meeting and there's a fundamental lie, you keep your mouth shut and it's emotive. You need a lot of courage to step out of the line, because, as you know, you've
yeah,
suffered from this, and I have suffered from this. It has major effects on your career. So but if you let it go, it becomes a norm, and that is where
yeah,
that's where you can corrupt even good people. And I mentioned Christianity. I know a lot of my Christian mates I fell out with, and these are hardened Christians. The sort of people in churches who sort of think, well, their feet don't touch the ground, but they
yeah,
loved all this Black Lives Matter stuff, and it was just doing my head in from the word go. I just thought
yeah.
this is appalling. So
Because
yeah,
a lot of people gain a lot of social status through virtue signaling,
yeah,
and one of the greatest vehicles for virtue signaling is religion.
yeah,
That's why one of the parts of the New Testament, the Bible, I think it's Jesus is talking about you shouldn't pray in public.
yeah, exactly.
And the meaning behind that is because if you pray in public, that's basically the virtue signaling. Look at me.
Yeah,
I'm speaking to God. I'm praying to God. You
yeah,
need to praise God in private because no one else needs to see what you're doing. Only
yeah.
you and God need to know.
Exactly. No, that's absolutely bang on the money. So yeah, yeah, and I think the really horrible problem, probably in a nutshell, which concerns me most out of all this, is that there's a battle between lies and good and truth at the moment, and there are people who don't for the reasons we've just talked about, because the ideology is so powerful, Nick. Um, they believe that they actually believe it. They actually believe
Yeah.
this stuff, and you and and if they believe that, then how do you deal? How do you engage and present that? I mean, um, that's actually what the winning thinking program does, and that's one of the things it seems to be having a new lease of life after a period of because it is a crisis management tool. It's born
Mm,
in not in nice fluffy leadership development times. It's born in crises, company turnaround. So
mm,
it's not for the faint-hearted. So, and I think actually that these tools that I mean, most leadership related stuff is bullshit, frankly, because it's okay when the wind's blowing in the right direction, but what actually works when things get tough, that's the challenge for us.
mm,
So, and actually, I think, how do we actually, people like you and I who are swimming against the tide, how do we actually, frankly, maintain our sanity?
mm,
And I think that to a degree, it's about maintaining relationships like this, Nick, because I value our discussions,
mm.
um, you know, and it's about upskilling and learning from each other and developing relationships. But so just in terms of wrapping this up, what would you sort of, what are the actions that you're taking to
Yeah.
on a daily basis to try and break the back of this at the moment? What are you doing there?
Before I answer that, let me jump back to something you said a minute ago about
Okay.
having a shared culture and social norms.
Yeah.
There's a story from the early 70s when they were filming the film Planet of the Apes. And as you can remember that film, there was no CGI those days. So all the monkeys, all the apes had prosthetics on their faces. They were dressed up as chimpanzees,
Yeah.
gorillas,
Yeah.
and orangutans. And the story goes that over the 6 months of filming that, at break times, at lunchtime, over the period of 6 months, the actors who were in costumes slowly over time started having breaks and lunches together. So there'd be tables full of gorillas, tables full of chimpanzees, and tables full of orangutans. But it
Yeah.
hadn't started off like that. It started off with a gorilla would know an orangutan actor from the film they did before,
Yeah.
gangster movie, and they would sit together. But over time, they naturally started hanging around with people who looked like them and
Yeah.
had a so-called shared culture.
Yeah.
That's because we're tribal creatures and it
Yeah.
happens subconsciously.
Yeah.
Hence why you're right, it's so important in this country. If we've got a multiracial country and a multi-religious country, it's extremely important we only have one national identity that pulls us all together. If not, and this happens in schools now. I'm speaking to so many people who go into school. I've not been in schools now for 15 years, but they say they go into schools and at dinner time, they go into the hall and they're saying the tables are separated by race. Those are
Really?
black tables, those are Asian tables, those are white tables. It's not
Wow.
policy. It's just the kids now split themselves into races. That didn't happen when I was at school, and my school was
No.
mostly Asian Muslims in my school. We didn't
Yeah.
do that,
No.
but it's happening now. Hence, it's so important we have a national identity that pulls us all together. Now, going
Yeah.
back to your last question, what are we doing? What am I doing about it? Going to be a little bit cheeky now. I'm going to plug a book. I released my
Yeah.
new book, was published yesterday, called
Yeah.
England's My England.
Oh, great.
And I talk about in there what we all need to do to
Yeah.
save this country. It's
Yeah.
not dead, it's not over, it's not finished. We've got hard times, but we've had worse times than this in our past, and we've always come through victorious. But the
Mm.
first thing we need to do as a people is we need to want this country to survive.
Yeah.
So every one of us needs to have that conversation in our head and say, do you want England to survive? And
Yeah.
if you do, then there's no option now apart from fight to make it survive.
Yeah.
And fighting is what you deem fighting to be. I don't mean going on the streets violently. I'm talking about what can you do in your life
Yeah.
to save this country and to get rid of the lies and to challenge the enemies, the traitors, the quislings that we have in government and through our institutions. So I go through all that in the book.
Right.
Well, I think that's what I'm doing. One man, I'm not Gandhi, I'm not Mandela. I'm not going to save this country. I'm not going to develop a following and take over the government and be prime minister and save us all. That's not going to happen.
Yeah.
I feel my job and my wish is to empower every single Englishman and woman who loves this country, empower them to do their bit.
Yeah.
Because if you add all that up, if you add up 30, 40 million people doing a little tiny bit, that's a tsunami of
Yeah.
change, of voices hitting our politicians.
Yeah.
And that's how we get the change we want. And that's how we save this country.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. Thanks. Where can people buy that? Was it? Is it on Amazon or something?
It's on Amazon, ebook, Kindle book, and paperback.
Brilliant.
So if you just Google my name on Amazon Books, I've got 4 books now, but that one was England, My England, was published yesterday.
Oh, I'll look at that, Nick. I'll get one. Yeah. Nice one. And what, just briefly, what tribe do you, we talked about tribes. What tribe, how would you describe your tribe?
I would say English, because our last conversation we talked about what does it mean to be British, and
Yeah.
I sort of sneakily changed it to what does it mean to be English. And the introduction to the book, I discussed this. I discussed why is this book not called United Kingdom, My United Kingdom, or Britain, My Britain? Why have I called it England, My England? And
Yeah.
that's because the United Kingdom is 4 different countries.
Yeah.
And we're cousins and we get along together and we're family.
Yeah.
But we're not the same people. You
No.
know, 10 years ago, 45% of the Scots wanted to leave the United Kingdom. So
Yeah.
how can I save the United Kingdom when 45% of Scots don't want it?
Yeah.
Same with the Welsh, 25% of the Welsh want to go independent. How can I save the United Kingdom when a quarter of the Welsh don't want to be in the United Kingdom. And then look at the Northern Irish. A third
Yeah,
of people that live in Ulster want to join a foreign country.
yeah,
So saving the United Kingdom isn't doable at the moment. I want
yeah,
to save England. And once you've
yeah,
saved England, maybe then we can save the United Kingdom. Or maybe the English go, and I'm tilting more towards this, maybe the English go, time we left the United Kingdom, time we went it alone.
yeah. Well,
Um,
I mean, what Tony Blair did was to utterly destroy by through devolution. He actually left the England totally hanging in a void.
yeah.
And yeah, no, I think that's really nice. I think the well, I hate the word nice actually. That's very interesting. Nice is an awful word. I think the for me, I'll tell you one thing. There's two things on this. One is I go to a church in London, right in the capital of immigration. It's actually where the all of the immigration gets funneled through, and I'm the only white person in the church. And there's unbelievable, and these people come from about 150 different nations, literally. And I love going there, Nick, because I find it very humbling, and I've so much in common with these people because of the common denominator of Christianity. Okay, and we all learn in this place together, and it's just I've made some really quite interesting sort of passing. I don't live locally; I live 40 miles away, but I travel 40 miles to go to this church in London. And I've learned, so I've learned very practically actually that experience of what does English look like, and I do think these people are. I think that the difficulty though is I think the other thing I'd say is that there are people like Maya Tusi, okay, who are people who are not originated from the UK, who love the UK. And I think it's really interesting to understand. And they are very much the sort of Norman Tebbit supporters of England when they play Pakistan or wherever their equivalent countries at cricket. So I think it's important to understand that.
There's an easy test for this, which is all over the internet now. I think it started in America, which is basically, oh, what is it? Oh, give me, it's something like, support the country you live in or live in the country you support.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it's this sort of anti-relationship stuff. I think it's when people stop talking to each other that so I mean, I've learned in my own skin that I have no racist bone in my body, even though I'm literally the only white person in this place, and in this church. So that's because of the cultural norm that these people, even though they come from 1,000 different countries, but I think it's this segregation that's dangerous. I think because
Yeah.
segregation fuels all the things we're talking about, fuels the ideology, it keeps it protected, and that's where the conflict is.
Yeah.
And I mean, personally, I don't think oil and water mixes. There's, unless we can, uh, unless people are willing to come into this country with an open mind and actually value what the UK is from the word go. If they, if what happens is they don't go through any process, they just go to segregated community, which is that tribe you described, go to
Yeah.
their favorite tribe, then basically that's a real problem. So I think there needs to be a sort of a tick box of, and I think there's absolutely no way that unfortunately most of those people that come across the channel would have any interest in the UK whatsoever and the values, and would if they walk around Westminster Cathedral, which is what David Starkey was talking about, 1,000 years worth of history in that place, and you see Isaac Newton and all the rest of it, and all the different things in there. You either value that or you don't. And if you don't value it, you ought to just this is not the right place for you.
Yeah. You could say that about 99% of all immigrants. The idea that immigrants come here because they love England and love the UK is wrong. It's a lie. Immigrants come here. My father came here as an immigrant for a better life, for
Yeah,
more money. That's
yeah,
why they come here. We hope they integrate once they're here and their children will love the country. That's what we hope. But we have no expectation of that. We don't force people to do that. We don't even tell
no,
them that's what we would like them to do. We allow them to ghettoize certain areas where it's all just one ethnicity, one religion, all from one country. And the only thing diversity brings is violence. That's the history of the world.
Yeah,
Diversity brings violence. And the only way to avoid that violence is to integrate the people, the
yeah,
foreigners who come. So they're not perceived as foreigners, they don't see themselves as foreigners, and they can't be called foreigners anymore. That's
yeah,
how you avoid the violence. But we've not
yeah.
done any of that in the last 80 years.
No, well, actually, the weird thing is, and actually, the economy. I take the Economist, although I've got 15. I haven't read 15 of the damn things. It's you get one a week. It's a nightmare. They just like feel like going to die under the pile of them. But uh, actually, weirdly enough, the UK is the best in Europe at integrating people into their community. We're actually very good at doing this, very oddly, which is another lie, actually, that it's
Well,
not
no,
true.
let me cut you there. It only seems we're good at it compared to our European neighbours.
Yeah, but
We're terrible at
relatively,
it. We're just better than other people who are doing it even worse than us.
yeah, yeah, I think that's true. But I think I think we have a heart to want it to happen. But I think
Mm.
that as Brits, so accusing us of being racist is wrong. But I think the critical point is that which comes back to relationship. If you stop talking to people, the only option you have to communicate is violence.
Mm.
And this is the problem. And this is the problem if democracy doesn't work. If you're not listened to in democracy, why did those guys? And they've got a very good reason to get very upset, because women are threatened in a lot of situations. There's a real threat, and they're not being listened to. So you're really cornering people. But it's so important that we develop relationships and have that common denominator. So um, that's definitely my focus. I use my humor as well and speak to the most unlikely people. But in fact, I do this on holiday. I had a bit of a joke with my daughter. We went to France. We would go cycling in France, climbing hills and stuff. And we had this. Uh, well, it's me actually. I tried to, in all kinds of different situations, make the French laugh, and some of the responses was very unsuccessful generally, but probably 2 out of 10 worked. The
Yeah.
rest of them just thought, "Who the hell is this guy?"
Ma- Making jokes with foreigners is very hard if you're not fluent in that language because
Yeah,
comedy is very nuanced.
yeah,
It's wordplay. And to do it to someone who's not an English speaker, it is very hard. But
yeah,
no, good on you for trying.
yeah. But it's maybe just an example of trying to overstep that barrier,
Yeah,
isn't it,
yeah, absolutely.
in
Well,
communities?
it's a good example of you treating them just like you treat anybody else,
Yeah, that's true. That's
trying
true.
to crack jokes and be funny.
Well, that's maybe the good note to finish
Yeah.
on it. It's my pleasure. It's great to speak to you, my friend, and to be continued.
Yes. Speak to you soon.
Take care. Cheers.
Did you enjoy that video? I think you did. Come on now, hit that bell, subscribe, comment. Let's build this channel. I need more followers, I need more subscribers. Be part of the journey. See you soon.